focuses on some saints that are not all that well known. Some of these saints that entered martyrdom under very difficult circumstances, shall we say, and are not really known by the general public very well. Let's start with the martyrs of Japan. Now, Saint Francis Xavier planted Christianity in Japan, where he arrived circa 1549. He himself, St. Francis Xavier, converted and baptized a considerable number of Japanese, and eventually entire provinces received the Christian faith. By 1587, there were over 200,000 Christians in Japan, but by that time, Japan's rulers decided to shut out the outside world, seeking to control, well, factors that might threaten political stability. The shoguns made some exceptions. A handful of Dutch and Chinese merchants were allowed to visit Nagasaki. The books that these merchants brought in, including the Bible, of course, were Japan's only source of knowledge of the outside world. And for over 200 years, the system of the closed country, sakuku, was maintained and did not begin to weaken until the mid-19th century in the face of increasing encroachment from the industrialized and, well, expanding Western world. Now, the Shogun Hideyoshi took the final steps in establishing Japan's policy of national seclusion, and the samurai ruler ordered that all missionaries should leave his dominions within 6 months. Now, some of these missionaries obeyed, but many remained behind in Japan. By 1596, Hideyoshi was roused to fury by the boast of the captain of a Spanish ship that the object of the Christian missionaries was to facilitate the conquest of Japan by the Spanish and Portuguese Catholics. Christianity was instantly regarded by the Japanese elite as an instrument of Western ambitions, and was now to be stamped out by every means at their disposal. Hideyoshi's belief of separation and isolation becomes a type of hallowed and sacred law. Christianity was now considered radical and subversive, a challenge to Japanese traditions. Christianity was dangerous, an influence on ideas that could revolutionize the whole outlook of Japanese society. Christianity was definitely viewed as subversive and radical, and viewed as a dangerous threat to the stability of Japan. Regardless of the intense anti-Christian propaganda by the Japanese ruling elite, the Christian faith continued to spread widely across all avenues of Japanese society. Now, St. Paul Niki had come from a noble Christian family in Kyoto. Niki was a Jesuit priest, and his persuasive sermons and evident holiness won over many doubters. He converted many people to Christianity. Niki's understanding and respect of Buddhism enabled him to make progress where European missionaries had failed, because he could engage the Buddhist leaders in debate, something most Christian missionaries could not do. Now, when the Shogun Hideyoshi, fearing that Christianity was part of a plot to conquer Japan, and was, well, roused into a fury of action, all across the Japanese landscape, all over the country, churches were put to the torch. Churches were set ablaze, and most missionaries left. But some others, including St. Paul Niki, remained behind to continue their work. Niki was soon arrested. In fact, on the day after Christmas in 1596, he was taken under guard to Kyoto, where other Christians who had also been arrested were being gathered. Some were Spanish and Portuguese, Jesuit and Franciscans, among them St. Peter Baptiste, the commissary of the friars Franciscans of Japan. You have Saint Martin de Aguirre, Saint Francis Blanco, Saint Francis of Saint Michel. These are all Spaniards. You have Saint Felipe de las Casas, who was born in Mexico City. You have Saint Gonzalo Garcia. Yes, there is a relation. Born in Bombay, India, whose parents were Indian converts and then took Portuguese names. Now, of the Jesuits, beside the high-born Japanese eminent preacher, St. Paul Niki, you have St. John Gatto and St. James Casal. These are Portuguese lay brothers. The remaining martyrs, and there are quite a few of them, were all Japanese, all Asians, and all Franciscans. A soldier, for example, like, what's his name? Saint Caius Francis. You had a physician, Saint Francis of Miyako, who was actually a native of Korea. You have an interpreter, Saint Leo Karasawa, and 3 young altar boys around the age of 13 who served with the friars at Mass. Saint Louis Abakari, Saint Anthony Denam, and Saint Thomas Kawasaki, whose father would also suffer martyrdom. Now, shortly before their ordeal was set to begin, their samurai captors sliced parts of their ears off, and they were then led through various towns, marched through the streets, their cheeks stained with blood, and the blood streaming down their faces. This was, a type of warning to all who dared worship Christ. The crowds turned out to jeer and spit at the, Jesuits and Franciscan martyrs. Upon their arrival at the place of execution near Nagasaki, where centuries later one of the first atomic bombs was to fall, the martyrs of Japan were allowed to make confession to 2 Jesuits. Then the shogun decreed that they should all die as their master Christ had died. The martyrs were then bound to wooden crosses by cords, and chains were placed tightly about their arms and legs. Finally, iron collars were fastened around their necks. They were then raised in the air, the foot of each cross falling into a hole in the ground that was prepared for it. The crosses were planted in a row about 4 feet apart. Now, each martyr had an executioner near him. This executioner was armed with a trident spear, a 3-pronged spear, and the executioner was ready to pierce the side of each martyr. As soon as all the crosses had been planted in a row, the executioners raised their trident lances, and at a given signal, all the martyrs were then killed, basically at the very same instant. Their blood and garments were then treasured by their fellow Japanese Christians, and miracles were attributed to them. St. Paul Niki and his companions were canonized in 1862 by Pope Pius IX, honored as the first martyrs of the Far East. Many others, many thousands of Japanese Christians were persecuted, and over 200 of them have been beatified. Their feast day is February 6th. All right, let's move on to the martyrs of Korea. Now, Christianity came late to Korea because, like Japan, it was the policy of Korea, the policy of the country's rulers, to keep the nation